Hey, I want to tell you a story to just kind of start this off. As we were thinking about Rahab, as we were thinking about this story in Joshua chapter 2 of what's going on in Jericho at this moment. I have a friend of mine. He's a great friend. We were basically kind of roommates during seminary time, and his name's Steve. And Steve actually lives in Amsterdam, and he's a missionary. And Steve called me, and it's a few years back, and Steve said, Trinity, I've got to tell you this story. And I was like, all right, man, tell me the story. He's like, well, I got on the train, and I went over to Brussels. And I got to Brussels, and there's this huge party going on in Brussels. And now, I got to tell you this about Steve, so it makes sense. Steve was born with cerebral palsy, and so Steve's legs weren't fully developed. And so Steve can't walk very fast. It's really tough for him to move around, and he's an amazing testimony of God calling and moving one man to go into missions when everybody else around him said he couldn't do it. So Steve's downtown Brussels, this huge festival, and he says he's down in the main square, downtown Brussels. He says the place is packed. There's people everywhere. And so Steve's, struggling to get through the crowd. And Steve says, man, I just had to find a side street. I had to get out of here. It was just way too many people. It was too hard for me to move around. Steve got to the edge, and he got to this side street. And he started to push through the crowd. And he got to the side street where there was nobody. He said he looked down this side street, and there was nobody. And he could see people on the other end. So he started to slowly make his way down to the other end of this side street. And he said he got halfway there, and somebody tapped him on the shoulder. So he turned around, and there was this guy standing there. And the guy goes, hey, you got some money? And Steve goes, now, first I thought, here I am in Brussels, and this guy knows English and speaks English to me just like that. And he goes, that was my first thing. I was like, whoa. And he goes, he didn't know what to do and say. And he said, the next thing that happens, this guy pulls a knife out, sticks it right to his belly, and goes, hey, you got some money? Really changes the question a little bit. I think I do. Now, Steve, like I told you, Steve can't run away from this guy. He's not going to physically defend himself in any manner. So he reluctantly starts to pull out his wallet, and he starts to hand it like this to the guy. And he says, right at that moment that my wallet is out and the guy's hand starts to touch my wallet, he said, all of a sudden, from one edge of the alleyway, this huge beast of a man that looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that's how he described me to this story. I wasn't there. He said he yells from the other edge of this alleyway, and he says, hey, is that man messing with you? And he says he's got his wallet out, and this guy's holding it, and there's a knife against his belly, and he's like, what do I yell? Yes? So he's like, and at that moment, the guy grabbed his wallet and ran off on the other end. Like I said, thousands of people on both edges of these alleys, so the guy disappears into the alley. And so Arnold Schwarzenegger comes running down the alley and gets to him and goes, what happened? And he said, that guy just stole my wallet. And he said, I am with the police. And he pulls out a badge and shows his thing, and he says, don't worry, I'll be back. And he runs after the guy. So Steve's stuck in this alleyway, and he's just there. And it's not like he can run and be in this foot pursuit as well. So he hobbles to the edge of the alley, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits, and he says, Trinity, I'm not joking at all. This is exactly what happened. I could hear sirens. And as these sirens are blaring, people are parting like the Red Sea. And here comes this little tiny thing of a car. We've got go-karts bigger than in the U.S. And it comes right up, and I look in, and he goes, I swear to you, the guy looked like Wesley Snipes that was driving it. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was riding shotgun. I'm like, what, did you get lost in Universal Studios? I mean, it doesn't sound like Brussels to me. And he said, get in. And so they get in the car, and they're driving around. They're searching for this guy that stole his wallet. And the cops tell him, they said, well, chances are the guy's buying drugs with it, and he's probably in a very well-known drug area of Brussels. So they take him down to this well-known area, and they see this huge chain-link fence in front of them where they pull up in their go-kart. And they see this guy on the other edge, or the other side of the fence, and he's buying drugs. And so Wesley Snipes and Arnold jump out of the vehicle, and they scale this fence, and they tackle this guy. And as they're tackling him, and they're beating him up, Steve says, he goes, I kid you not, they're on the ground punching this guy. And they go, and Steve goes, and they go, so they take this guy in their go-kart back to the police station, and they got him in an interrogation room, and they come out and they say, Steve, they say, we're sorry, but he won't sign a release to give you all of, or give back the stuff that he has. And I guess there's some crazy law in Brussels that, unlike here where we confiscate everything when you get arrested, you have to sign a waiver to give them everything. And this guy would not sign it. And he said, but listen, you don't understand. I'm a missionary in Amsterdam. That's all my money. That's my driver's license in there. My credit cards are in there. I need that to get back. And he said, Arnold looked at him and said, okay. And he said, he walked in that interrogation room and he just heard, comes out and goes, he signed it. I tell you that funny and humorous story just to tell you this, that I remember that Steve kind of closed this out to me, and because I've always been warning Steve. I mean, the guy's been robbed 8 times. I mean, he's always getting robbed. I mean, he's been shot at. His car's been stolen. And, he grew up here in the United States, handicapped. And he said to me when we were talking about it, he says, I grew up believing that I could go anywhere and trust anyone. And so that's what I do in life. That's just the way I live my life, is I believe that I can trust anyone. So I live my life that way. That story was just ringing in my ears and when I was thinking about Rahab, because really what Steve did, it's what all of us do. What Rahab did, it's what all of us do. We act on what we believe. We live what we believe. I mean, what's dormant inside of us, what's below the surface, what is really our beliefs, that, my friends, is what you and I will choose to act on, is our core beliefs. Yeah, if you were to look up Rahab throughout the Bible, she's not just in Joshua chapter 2. She's actually mentioned by the writer of Hebrews in chapter 11, and that's considered the faith chapter. And then James records her in his letter in James chapter 2. He brings up Rahab as well. So this story's bigger than just what's going on in Jericho. She becomes a monument of acting on our beliefs, acting on what is central, what's core, what we truly think. And I have to admit to you, as we keep going in this, I struggled when they told me, hey, we're going to talk about Joshua chapter 2 with Rahab. And I was reading the story going, huh. All right. And I kept reading it and reading it and reading it and going, come on, God, give me some bam out of this. Give me, knock me over. And I was just waiting for it. So I thought, okay, let's do this. I'm going to go verse by verse, detail by detail in my mind. I'm going to find the details, God. She's in here for a reason. She's recorded in Hebrews 11 for a reason. James records her in chapter 2 for a reason, God. What is that reason? So let's unpack this today. Let's just unpack this. If you have a Bible, you turn to Joshua chapter 2. We'll put the verses up as well. Joshua chapter 2, verse 1. The story starts off like this. It says, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly, we already heard it wasn't a big secret, sent 2 spies. And they said, go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered, I love this part, the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and stayed there. Now, my crazy mind, I'm thinking, why'd they pick a prostitute's house of all places? But she's probably the only one they felt safe with because she was already an outcast from society. They probably wasn't somebody that they're really going to for political help. You know, like, what's going on, Miss Prostitute? We need to know what's going on in Jericho. This is probably a safe haven for an outsider. But that's the point. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 1, the writer of Joshua says it was a prostitute, a woman of ill repute, a woman who was already an outcast by society, a woman that everybody knew that was a prostitute. In fact, Hebrews, remember the big faith chapter, the Hall of Fame of faith? Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 31. This writer writes, by faith, the prostitute Rahab. Why couldn't he just say Rahab? No, he points out the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. See, why God's adding this, why these details are here for us, is that God is no respecter of person. It doesn't matter where you fall on the cultural ladder, whether you think you're good enough to truly live for God or not. You're God's creation. Bottom line, you're God's. And no decision that you made in the past, nor that you're making right now, separates you from the fact that you're God's. And no matter what you label yourself, or no matter what the world labels you, you still can act on that faith. You still can live for God. Because God is no respecter of persons. Period. James says this in his letter, James chapter 2, verse 25. He says, in the same way was not even Rahab, the prostitute, he throws that out, considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. I mean, even the tone of James' letter, he's saying, look, even this prostitute got it. Even the prostitute, the people that you guys think culturally is down and out, she got it. Rahab didn't let her label, or even maybe some bad choices that she'd made in life, hold her down from acting out her faith in God, what she truly believed. Look at this. If we keep going, we keep unpacking this. If we move down to verse 8 of Joshua chapter 2, we'll just read 2 verses here. Let's read 3 instead. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof, and she said to him, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to those 2 kings of the Amorites east of Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Did you hear what she just said? She said, I know this is your land because of God. She said, the Lord your God is God over heaven and this earth. These are her beliefs. This is what's inside of her. And she didn't just profess this. This isn't just cognitive belief and understanding. This was something she was going to act on, because it's bigger than just facts. It's bigger than just a confession of faith. Knowing doesn't mean actional faith. You can have it all together up here, but not have it in here that's living out there. James chapter 2, verses 17 and 19. James, when he's talking about Rahab, he actually goes on to say this: in the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead. Now, I know I went to my senior year of high school here in Utah, and I've heard this verse over and over and over when I was living in Utah. But you got to keep reading here in verse 18 and 19. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I'll show you my faith by what I do. You believe there's one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. Even the demons believe. So it's not just good enough to have this cognitive understanding and faith, or this cognitive understanding of who God is, but to truly have that real, actional faith like Rahab when the whole world's against you. But yet you know what you know. It's taking those steps out. It's not the action. It's the belief. James, he keeps on going when we get to verse 25, and he says, in the same way, was not even the Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? But then verse 26 says this, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. James understood something that Rahab understood completely. And that's this, that you can say all day long that you believe it. But if you're not going to act on what's truly central, you really don't believe it. It's not in there. You're lying to yourself somewhere. Because you're going to live what you believe. You are going to live what you believe. It's not something we just write about. It's not something we just blog about. It's not something we just come to a Sunday gathering and listen to somebody else talk about. It's not something that we just profess. Because true belief, true faith, as James says, you're going to live it. It's going to come out. It's going to come out. Now, my 4-year-old daughter, Madison, I think she's got her mom's personality because she's just dominant, controlling. My wife's not here yet. But my daughter is, I love kids because kids live their belief and their faith out. They don't lie about anything. They live it out. And my daughter, Madison, I wish she had different belief systems when it comes to water. Because my daughter honestly believes deep down, I've had conversations, and try to have a rational conversation with a 4-year-old. But I've had conversations about her fear of water. She has none. She told me, Dad, it's just water. See, what I'm trying to say about this is my daughter, if you stick her on the edge of a pool, she'll jump in. And unlike what I think is rational, when I pull her out of the water, I want her to cry or something, be scared. And she's like, she can't breathe. But she thought that was fun. Because nowhere in her mind or her belief system is that water going to hurt her, even though she couldn't breathe for a little while there. I'm like, geez, please, cry, something, be scared. No, every time she's straight in the water. And I was thinking about that when I was thinking about Rahab, how Rahab almost in that sense just was like, man, if God's behind it, I'm diving in. I'm going headlong. I'm diving in. I don't care if I can't breathe. I don't care if the culture around me is going to smother me because I'm the prostitute that's hiding the spies and everybody else is scared. I'm going in. I'm giving it everything. Because real faith is shown. Real faith is shown through our actions. And James was telling us that. As Mike was telling you that my story of kind of moving out here and being here in Utah, God called me to Utah to plant a church, and I didn't want to go. I was like, Hawaii, God? They need pastors in Hawaii. Let's go there. I'm serious. That wasn't a joke. And I kept on going to bed every night, and God was changing my heart and saying, no, go. You got to go. We're like, all right, God. And I see Matt got there. I'm sorry, Matt, I'm pointing you out. You moved out from Colorado to plant the church with us, and then you married Shannon and moved to K2, but it's all right. It's all right. God still loves you somewhere. He's no respecter of persons. That's what I've learned. But God started forming this team around us of other people who were called to Utah. And so literally 4 years ago, we came. We didn't know what we were doing. We were like, all right, God, we love you. You've called us here. We'll love people, and we'll tell them about you. And before we knew it, we had 3 families and a dog named Carson hanging out at a house church. Carson's still there to this day. He was our first convert. But those 3 families and that dog named Carson, I mean, it grew within 9 months' time that we had 40 people packed out in this house. And I still had no clue what we were doing, and I'm looking around going, people are sitting on my stairs, they're sitting everywhere. We probably need a bigger gathering place. So we started 2 house churches, and then we launched into a movie theater where we are today, and we rent a movie theater in Layton to meet. But I remember thinking back to when God first called us to do those things. Man, I'm 29 years old. I'm young. I know it. I haven't served a lot of time in churches. And I remember one pastor telling me, he goes, man, you're too young. You're too young. I was like, I am? Oh, great. This is going to mess up everything. I got to make a different decision then. I remember one pastor telling us, you can't have too many pastors on your team when you go out there because you're like a multi-headed dragon. You're a multi-headed monster. Anything with more than one head is a monster. What book is that from? Man, I had to really do some soul searching. Is God really calling us to Utah? Because everybody around me is telling me no. Everybody around me is telling me later, do it later. Everybody around me is telling me there's something wrong with this. I was like, all right, God, we'll do it. Because it takes courage. Really, when it comes down to it, when you're starting to struggle between if your actions and your beliefs are lining up, really that connection point between the two, the bridge, is courage. I have a habit that every Sunday morning I end up at a Starbucks early in the morning, and I go through my sermon or my message, and I just write out more and more thoughts, and the sermon becomes way too long. And I'm there this morning. I'm actually at a coffee shop on State Street. Something about a bad donkey, and and I'm sitting there this morning. They got this television playing, and ESPN's on there, and I'm literally at this point in my sermon just reading through it, just praying, thinking about it. And I look up, and ESPN is showing this story about this guy, this kid, John Chalice, and the Tampa Bay Rays. And they're talking about this kid who had cancer, and he just died this year, and how he inspired the whole Tampa Bay Rays team. And this is what he inspired them with. I'm in tears at the donkey place with the ESPN. I'm like, God, you're speaking to me. Because this is what he said. He said, belief plus courage equals life. And I was like, that's what God came here for you and I, is a life worth living, an abundant life. When our beliefs need that extra bridge, that step, it's courage. It's stepping out when nobody else around us will. It's stepping out when all the circumstances say, no, don't do that. You're a prostitute, and the rest of us don't agree. Real faith is grown in those times when we act. It becomes a building process, really. And it takes courage. One step of obedience, another step of obedience, before finally, bam, we're where God has designed for us to be. Hey, I want to take a moment here, and we're going to check out a video clip from an interview with Sam that kind of illustrates this point.
Before I came to Utah, I was living in Canada, and I was working as a consulting structural engineer in Canada, and I was totally focused on my career. I became a believer in my mid-20s, and at that point I began a walk with God that was probably pretty typical. I attended church. I didn't really do anything else, and I focused most of my time, my attention, on just developing my career. I wanted to just make my mark on the world. At 32, I met my husband now, Joe Albano, and we met in Mexico. We were scuba diving there. So within 3 months we were engaged, and a year after that we were married. I had never wanted to have kids, and he had always wanted to have kids. During the first few years of marriage, we'd moved to Utah, and we were living in the South Weber area. And Joe and I had been attending a church up there that offered adult Sunday school classes. And so I began to be involved with this adult Sunday school class. I began to really enjoy learning God's Word. And I began to really feel solidified in what I believed. And Joe said to me, "Do you want to have kids?" And I said, "Nope." And he said, "Well, I do." And I said, "Well, I don't." And he said, "Well, you need to pray about it. Pray all you want. I'm not going to change my mind. I've never wanted to have kids. I don't even like kids. And I don't really feel that that you're being fair, because we had agreed, and he had agreed with me at the beginning, that he would marry me even if I never did want to have children." That's how we restored that broken engagement. I was in a Bible study at that time, and we had been studying 1 Peter, and we got to 1 Peter 3. And as I was reading 1 Peter 3, and I just read it this morning, it was very clear that wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. I felt actually pretty good about that, because I thought, I've submitted to Joe. I left my job in Toronto. I left my family. I left my friends. As I prayed and as I read, I realized that I was not obeying God's Word. And I went back to 1 Peter 3, and I looked at all of those words in the Greek, what it meant to have a gentle and quiet spirit. And I was pierced, because I realized that wasn't me. That was not me at all. And that I didn't have the character that God wanted me to have. As I prayed, God really spoke to me and just said to me, "Yeah, you may have submitted in many areas to your husband, but not in the matter of having children." This problem of children had been boiling around and rolling around inside of me, and I was laying in my bed, and I just was saying, "God, please, I would rather die than be a mother. I just don't want to have children. It's just not who I am. I would rather be told that I had cancer and was going to die in 3 months than to be told that I had to be a mother for the rest of my life." So for me, this decision led to the death of who I was, for all of my hopes, for all of my dreams, for all of my own plans for my own life. They were over. And then I think I struggled with, is God really good? I just continued to pray, and God was very clear. It's like, "No, this is my will for you." And I think that at that moment, for me, I had to make this decision. Was everything that I had learned and everything that I believed, was it really true faith? I realized that if I was not going to obey, then I was a hypocrite. At that moment, I had to make this decision. And the decision was, either you say you believe and really believe and then walk in what you believe, or you just have to throw it away. I felt like I had no choice. I told Joe about it, and he was ecstatic, that I was going to try it. But I was like, okay, this is my submission is this. Okay, we will try from January 1 to December 31st, and if we don't get pregnant, we're done, and you're never bringing it up again. And sure enough, I got pregnant. Well, then I was devastated, and I had this belief that God loved me, and He would give me what I wanted to be happy. I never got angry at God, because I had enough understanding of who He was. to know that he was doing these things in my life for a purpose. And I know he had a plan for my life, but was it really for my good? And what if my good and his good weren't the same thing, you know? Here I am, and my baby is born, as we say, if you're a Princess Bride fan, mostly dead. And his Apgar, when he was born, was a 4. And so I was laying there, and Joe just began to pray in the operating room out loud, and just beseeching God for the life of this child. And in the midst of Joe's prayer, we heard this tiny cry, and he breathed on his own. And God just had a little resurrection moment right there in the OR. He's our child, and he's, I think, a miracle baby. God has real plans and a purpose for him in his life. Because I think that his birth in and of itself, that he's alive today, and that he's totally bright, it's a miracle. And most babies in that situation are either die, they don't make it, they have severe brain damage, or they're normal. And Noah's normal, and he's actually even a gifted kid. So it's a miracle. What happened to me was just really through studying God's Word, that not only did my faith grow, my relationship with God has gotten deeper. My relationship with my husband has changed, and my whole life has changed because I believe I was obedient to God.
Sam's belief in God was challenged, and her steps of obedience grew this deeper faith in God and truly living out what she believed. And the bottom line is this, is the opening song from Sister Hazel. And if you want to change your life, if you want to change your life, you need to change your mind. You need to change your beliefs. Because a lot of times we focus on the action part and go, oh, it's the action's the problem. It's my belief that's the problem. Because my belief leads to my thinking, leads to some type of emotion, leads to my action. If you want to change that, change your faith, change your beliefs, change your mind. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says this: do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Change your beliefs, and you'll change your actions. You'll have that real active faith. Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. Look at that. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Think back to the story of Rahab. If you finish reading chapter 2 and see everything that happened, we know Jericho falls. We know the walls come crumbling down. We know that she puts the scarlet cloth out her window, that she and her family are spared destruction. But it says there that she lives with the Israelites, the Hebrews, forever. Her and her family, they're spared. I think I just blew up. There are pyrotechnics today in the middle of this. She's blessed. She's blessed by God. The blessing falls her. Her reward is given. Man, we're about to go into worship. We're about to finish out our day worshiping together, praising God together in song. I want to ask you some questions as we start to pull this together and go, wow, Rahab, great story that happened way back when. What about here today with us? What would it really look like if everything we say about God, all of our beliefs that we say, well, yeah, that's mine, that's my belief about following Jesus. what would that really look like if we took that and lived it? What would happen? What would be the next step for you? For some of us, we've been struggling because we know that God's calling us to something. And that something has a name for you. I don't know it. And you haven't taken the step on it yet. What would it look like if we did? If we all took that step? Where would our lives be? What blessings would start to befall us? How would we be rewarded? Maybe the bigger question outside of just our lives, what would Utah look like? What would our neighborhoods look like? You realize that with or without Rahab, God was moving. With or without Rahab, Jericho was going down. With or without Rahab. But the blessing was all Rahab's. Because she worked. She stepped. She acted on knowing that God was God of heaven and earth. And that Jericho was his to have. If I can invite the worship team to join me on stage here. Will you surrender? Will you surrender to your beliefs? Will you surrender to the faith you have in God? Because God was going to move. And He's going to move here. Will you take that next step of faith? Will you? Let me give you some practical applications real fast. One, maybe it's time for you to start walking with others that actually live it out. You need to start surrounding yourself with others that are acting out their beliefs and their faiths. That can be done in small groups or maybe just one-on-one discipleship time of just hanging out. Two, maybe it's a huge, courageous jump that you need to take where God's been speaking to you and maybe He, unlike me, called you to go to Hawaii and pastor a church. Go. I'll go with you. Maybe there's some big thing that He's been just working on. Maybe it's having a baby like Sam. Submitting to your husband. Submitting to the call of ministry. Maybe it's even not such a huge, big, courageous jump, but maybe it's just simply learning more. And in fact, there's a book that it's available to purchase out there. It's called Wavelength, and it's just written by an average, everyday guy. He's a friend of Pastor Dave Nelson's, and he wrote this book about stepping out in faith every day and what God was leading him to, what God was calling him to. What's your next step? Let's do it together. God, take us. Take us that next step, God. Change us. God, help us to understand what our faith and our belief of you and what you called us and what you're telling us and what you're teaching us, God. And how our hands and our feet must move that way. God, direct us. God, I pray that you give us courage. God, help us to just have the practical little things yet to the big, huge jumps. God, as we go into this time of worship, God, I just ask that you just come down right now, God. Speak into my heart. Speak into the hearts of all my friends here. Encourage us, God. Take us that next step. In your name, Jesus. Amen.